right, so I just wanted to come back to something I just did in the previous video that I sort of had a blonde moment in the throes of. I was trying to place this image, or this shape, I should say, on top of this shape, and it continued to look like it was constantly behind this one. And I looked at my layers panel, and of course you'll see that this darker purple shape is down near the bottom, so it is in the back, and this lighter shape is on top. And of course, this isn't visible because it's a lower opacity, it's 50% of the same color. So as I place it on top, it's actually having no effect or no noticeable change to this shape. However, just to validate that this does in fact work, remember when you place something on top in your layers panel, it's going to be on top of everything else. Okay. So for instance, you can see here, this is clearly on top of my flowers, which is layer number 4. It's also on top of my polka dot pattern. Okay. Although it may look like the polka dots are on top, they're poking through, or that's not really the right term, but they're visible because again, this shape was filled with a color at 50% opacity. Okay. So again, in case I left you wondering what was going on in the last video, I wanted to make sure you understood what was happening. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and now get rid of these shapes. Okay. And again, I need a new layer. I'm going to grab my marquee tool and go ahead and drag out a fairly large square, because I'm going to now go back to my paint bucket and I'm going to move to my gradient tool. Okay. Now your gradient tool is very similar to what we played with in Illustrator, but remember when we did in Illustrator, we had to also open a panel. Okay, remember it was the tool plus the panel, and there was some finagling to get that to work. It actually gave us a lot more options, so it was worth the trouble, but you're going to find the gradient tools much easier to master in Photoshop. So again, once the tool is active, you're going to notice that your options bar changes. And the first item here is a series of different gradients. The first one being your foreground to your background. The second one is your foreground to transparent, and then a bunch of presets. Okay, and some of these can be really fun, particularly the rainbows. So I'm going to stick with what I have to begin with. Okay, and then moving over here, you're going to see that you have a range of different styles of gradients. And in Illustrator, we played with linear and we played with radial, but we have additional options here. You have angle, you have reflected, and you have diamond. I'm not going to run through all of these just, for the sake of time. I'll start with linear and radial, and if you'd like to play with the others, you certainly can, because you'll have enough basis to understand how to use the tool, of course. You'll see you also have mode here, and then you also have opacity. Okay. So I've got this shape. I'm on a new layer. I'm on the right tool. I'm simply going to click and drag. Okay, and you're going to see that that is filled with gradient. And because my two colors are really similar, the transition is very, very subtle. If I keep it a little bit shorter, you'll see a more distinct transition. And I do want to point out that this is gradient on top of gradient. Okay. So it's not resetting it. I'm putting more gradient on more gradient, so it's more color, more color. So I'm just actually going to step back so you can see more distinctly as I do this. If I keep it super short, I'll get a much sharper gradient change. Okay, I can also start from outside and end outside. Okay, and when I do that, it's very, very, very subtle. It almost looks solid. You've likely noticed that I continue to move in this diagonal direction. I can go left to right, up or down. Okay, I can keep that perfectly straight if I need to. Really, it's totally open-ended. You can use any direction that you'd like. I'm going to back, and again, I just keep hitting Command Z to undo. And I'm going to change my gradient to my foreground color to transparent. And again, I'll work diagonally from corner to corner. Okay, and you'll see again my color transitioning off into nothing, and it's going to end in white. I'm going to step back again, and maybe I just want more white in this particular shape. So you'll see here, if I start outside of my shape and end somewhere in the middle, okay, you'll see I get about a 50% fill. And I'll just deselect in this instance so you can see what that looks like without the border sort of muffling the appearance. Okay, I'll step back. I'll step back one more time. And I'll move to my radial. And I'll just go ahead and grab something really bright and festive. Maybe that one. And with this one, I'm going to start in the middle and out. And you'll see that if I start in the middle, I'll center that radial gradient in the middle of my shape. Okay, I'm going to step back and I'll make my gradient path shorter. And you'll see I get a much more distinct shape within my marquee shape. Or I can run outside to outside. Okay, and you'll see what that looks like. That essentially wherever I start this line is going to be the center of my radial. So you can see in this instance, it was out here. So I'm getting this much, much more subtle round shape within my rectangle. Okay, feels much more tie-dye, a little bit more psychedelic. Now, in terms of real world use, obviously it's a really creative tool. You may choose to use this as some sort of backdrop in your final project. I've also had students use it to recolor a dress that maybe your subject is wearing. But in the real world, I've used it most frequently to recolor mirrors. I worked for a home decor company for a couple of years, and when product images would come to us, often they tried to render it with the mirror in place, and sometimes what was reflected in the mirror wasn't attractive. Sometimes the photographer was literally in the mirror. And so what we would do is we would use the rectangular marquee tool if it was a rectangle mirror, select the mirror, hit delete, and then come back in much like this where you've got this really subtle change in color. I would use like a medium gray and a slightly darker gray, and I would create a gradient of gray color within the mirror so it gave you the essence of what that reflection would look like without it actually reflecting anything. Okay, truly in real life, that's probably what I've spent most of my time using the gradient tool for. But again, it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of creative work that you can do with it. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and pause the video here. I'll be back in a moment to continue to talk about color.